Good morning, everyone. My name is Deepak Kalra. Thanks very much, Anna, for inviting me to speak to you. I'm going to speak to you on a totally different topic in a way, although these are all related, about scaling up the opportunity space for using big data in healthcare. On one level, it's hard to imagine a better moment from an opportunity point of view. We are collecting data in so many different ways on individuals through a health and wellness journey. And so this ellipse represents an exciting opportunity space, but it does also represent a challenge, because many of these logos and objects on this slide are kinds of silo. We don't easily realize the ellipse that connects them all. And so part of our challenge is making sense, understanding new things from data that actually have to come together, but we've not been very good at bringing together up to now. The opportunity is huge because we are also at an exciting convergence point where clinical research needs to shift from a classical approach where much of the learning takes place in randomized clinical trials, through to making much better use of what is known in the industry as real-world data, but which clinicians regard as normal data to them, clinical data. There is an opportunity space to use electronic health records to optimize the way clinical research is undertaken in a clinical trial sense, which I'll come on to, but also to use data in a more real-world sense, which I will say something about, and Michel will also pick up in his talk to follow. But at the same time, there are many reasons why healthcare needs to learn more from its data. There is a pressure like never before to cope with demographic shifts and multimorbidity, to apply clinical practice more closely to clinical guidelines and care pathways, to empower patients much more in their own self-management, and to use accumulated health data to sharpen political strategy and healthcare decision-making so that we plan our services more solidly on evidence rather than anecdote, which is how healthcare behaves today. And so we have the opportunity, excitingly, to collaborate between these two worlds that have historically tackled using data at scale in quite different ways. I want to spend about half of my time talking to you about the Innovative Medicines Initiative program, because I'm going to mention two projects, one in more detail than the second, as examples of where these two worlds have come together, admittedly focusing more on delivering for research, but bringing together partnerships, public and private partnerships, with quite significant budgets over quite significant timeframes to try to scale up how we can make better use of health data. I'm going to start with describing a clinical trial scenario. You don't have to read all of the numbers on this slide. What you can basically get is bad news. Clinical trials are expensive, but worse, there are significant challenges with under-recruitment, the inability to find enough patients at a trial site who meet the eligibility criteria, resulting in having to regularly change the goalposts of a clinical trial, which is expensive to propagate across a multinational study. And sometimes trial centers fail so poorly to recruit enough that they really don't deliver at all, and occasionally clinical trials actually fail to complete, and a potentially valuable drug never makes it to the market because the study couldn't be performed. So I was privileged in being part of a team that wrote a successful proposal, and in the end we co-ran a project called EHR4CR, which was looking to address the challenge of how we could reuse the data in hospital electronic health records to sharpen the process of designing and then recruiting into clinical trials. So that's roughly what this slide says. I'm a veteran of EC projects. I won't tell you quite how many I've been involved in or run, but a lot, and I've got many grey hairs that come from those. This is one of the most successful I've ever been involved in, and we made the unusual request for a no-cost extension for the extremely rare reason that we had succeeded in doing everything we needed to do in the time available, but we hadn't used all the money up, and we wanted to build sustainable solutions. I've never had that experience before, and not many of us in EC projects have that experience. I've asked for extensions many times, but for the usual pessimistic reason, we haven't quite managed to do everything we promised. So this was an unusual success story. A very large consortium, as IMI projects are, and I won't go through these logos, but you get an idea that it's a mixture of pharma companies, academic organizations, hospitals, and then a whole series of people who aren't logofied, but were our advisors and under ethics and scientific boards. What we were trying to do was to work across the pharma industry to say, how are clinical trial designs handled? And so we had to undertake certain tasks across the companies, like mapping the workflows for protocol feasibility. How do you design a protocol such that its inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria will generate enough valid patients to run the study? Then when it's time to recruit, how do we optimize the ways in which patient recruitment takes place so eligible patients are found quickly? And then finally, when it comes to executing the trial, can we share data between EHRs and clinical trial systems, again, to make clinical trial processes more efficient? We had to look at the availability of data. It's all very well saying, can we query EHRs to find out if patients match criteria? But you can't do that unless hospital EHRs actually have relevant data. So we looked in all of our hospitals in the pilots to say, given the kind of data that clinical trial criteria represent, what do you have? And what we found was actually quite a high percentage of data points were present in most hospitals to a reasonable quality. Not perfect, I'll come back to data quality later, but good enough to go, which was exciting. Really important. We are about to query in this project, we're about to query in this project, hospital electronic health records to find out how many people might meet eligibility criteria with no consent, no prior warning. What do the public feel about this kind of thing? Obviously with privacy protection, but not with consent. You can see from this, it was important for us to ask the public. We did public consultation exercises, and we were really overwhelmed at how positive the public view was on this kind of use of data. It's also important that you don't develop a product or a solution that's going to be very nice for a few years and disappear. So we had to look at the sustainability, and we did some very advanced, sophisticated business modeling, and I'm not going to tell you about the results. I'm only telling you we did it, trust us, you can find all these when you search. All right? It's important to show that you can sustain the results. So what does it look like operationally? In this dotted green rectangle, I haven't looked behind me. Oh, you do still. Oh, that's okay, just checking. I haven't looked at the slides behind me. You are seeing it. Imagine that's a hospital which has its own electronic health record. Nobody will let you query remotely their live operational system. Forget that. But what you can do is export and extract into a clinical data warehouse. And then the Insight product, which was the sustainable product and is now the viable, sustainable, ongoing commercial solution from the project, they have a local listener that allows queries to come in and only query the data warehouse, not query the real EHR. And they then have a central platform which does not itself store the data, but only acts as a channel. They help the hospital with mapping so that the hospital can easily create the data warehouse in a standardized way. They provide a channel for researchers to run the queries to find out about the number of patients who might be available. And the only thing that comes out is aggregated patient counts. And this is how we were able to gain such strong public support and ethics committee support for this. Only patient numbers, not subject level information, leaves and also it is well protected, including usual privacy-enhancing techniques, including things like small cell size suppression, as you'd expect. A further incentive is the hospitals now have a data warehouse and some tools they can use for local learning, and we're about to conduct a study of the hospitals that have been early adopters to say, how have you used this? What have you learned? How have you used your ability to query your own EHRs better to improve quality, outcome, safety, or other things that you do in the hospital? We're about to do that study. We didn't manage to do everything we promised. I lied earlier. We did nearly everything we'd promised for the money, but we have now been successful in getting a follow-on project grant through EIT Health called EHR to EDC. That project just started at the beginning of the year. We're in a ramp-up phase to now try to enrich the connectivity between EHR and clinical trial systems so we can see more two-way sharing during the process of a clinical trial. Second project, EMIF, a bit more in your camp because it's a bit more big data, and I'm going to say a little about it now because I'm going to say a bit more about it later in the day. So EMIF is a project that is almost over after 5.5 years. It has been looking at trying to address 3 important questions in a federated big data landscape. How do you discover what you need? How do you discover where the data might exist that are relevant to your research question? How do you assess in practice whether the data source actually has the data you really need and enough patient numbers? And then finally, when you want to do your piece of research and you found the data you need, what are the good practices that enable you to actually undertake that research? And I'm going to have to apologize to you that I don't have the time and I don't have all of the other partners in the project who would be able to give you fantastic shows of all of this, although I do have, with great luck, Michelle with me, and we will do our best to field all your millions of questions about EMIF through the course of the day. Another large consortium, I won't spend time on this, but as you can imagine, again, IMI huge, and you see that there is, again, a mixture of academic partners, pharma companies, small to medium-sized companies, only one patient organization. We wish in hindsight we'd have had more. How does it work, roughly, on one slide? So a 5-year project on one slide. On the left-hand side, what you have is an imaginary set of data sources. These could be disease registries, they could be electronic health records in a hospital, it could be a longitudinal cohort study that's been accumulated in a particular country. For each of those data sources, a bit like on the previous EHR for CR scenario, they don't have to expose their raw data. They create an extract, a subset of the data that they're willing to share with others, and this is mapped to a common information model. EMIF eventually, after quite some experimentation, settled as its primary destination the OMOP data model, and has worked a lot with the Odyssey community, which is the open source community supporting the use of OMOP around tooling. And so if you go to the EMIF website, you'll find out much more about the tools that have been developed. Another important thing that has to be solved is semantic interoperability, mapping the data to a common ontology and semantic structure so that it is possible to run federated queries across multiple heterogeneous data sources and have consistent, sensible responses. That semantic interoperability magic was actually led by Michel, and he is not going to be drawn into too much detail, but you might still catch him over lunch and ask him difficult questions, and he'll give you clever answers. You do need sometimes, you can't run detailed, in-depth research only on federated queries. At times you're going to need to pull out an extracted data set from multiple data sources and put it in the middle and do a mashup in order to get exactly what you need. And so there is a mechanism that EMIF developed around how you can have effectively a transient, secure data pool where you can do that. EMIF has achieved a lot. But the one thing it wasn't able to achieve was to scale up across Europe. So EMIF developed how to do it. But what we are now seeing is a new project about to start called Eden, which is a kind of EMIF successor. And Michelle is actively involved in that as well. And again, over lunch, over a beer, you might catch him to tell you about that. So that project is about to start, and it's a scale-up. It's basically to bring a huge number of data sources across Europe into a data sharing family using homogeneous standards, homogeneous semantics, so that we can scale up the capability to do real-world research at scale. So I'm going to just shift now for a few minutes onto some of the challenges that are outstanding. Privacy protection, security, you can imagine, is a massive issue. The quality and interoperability of the data, and then finally, how we can help to promote value in healthcare from using data, which I won't have time to say much about today. So just very briefly, I want to tell you that as a result of the EHR4CR project, one of the spin-outs, apart from the inside commercial product, was to create a European institute, which I head up, the European Institute for Innovation Through Health Data, which is known as IHD for short. And we were basically created because there was felt to be a need to play a central role in helping to define how governance takes place in the big data ecosystem in Europe, that there are many, many actors doing different things around good practice, but can there be an umbrella that tries to look after homogeneity in this space? How can we promote better adoption of standards and improving data quality? Can we help to bridge the silos in data standards that exist between research and care? Because there are very deep silos there. And how can we help society to better understand why reusing their data is in society's interests? And that's also felt to be a very important message for us to take forward. If I'm lucky, I can... No, it doesn't work that way. It's meant to. Okay, now it has. I wanted to just skip a slide, and sometimes the keyboard behaves in a way that's appropriate. The challenges I've described cannot be addressed by any one stakeholder group. So an important part of how we work is to bring stakeholders together to try to co-create the solutions that are needed in these areas. It can't be done by any one group. Academia absolutely can't run it. Industry absolutely can't run it. Neither the pharma industry nor the ICT sector can drive this. Oh no, it didn't work, actually. Let me try now. Yeah, okay, good. That slide had a lot of builds. I just decided it's quicker to tell you instead verbally. So if I take the information governance topic as one example of what we're trying to do, we're building on the GDPR, which is obviously next week hitting us square in the face, and the IMI Code of Practice on the secondary use of data, which is a really important and valuable instrument. But building on top of that, more operational instruments, principles, standard operating rules for using federated research platforms, looking at how we can educate and train staff. Many staff working with clinical trials are not familiar with real-world data because clinical trials data sits inside a consent framework. Real-world data doesn't. Many healthcare organizations are familiar with working with highly identified, highly sensitive personal data for the delivery of care. They're not always good at how they reuse that data for research. So we see some gaps in governance awareness of staff on the industry side and on the clinical care side that we need to bridge. We want to reach a stage where we can accredit staff and organizations as having good practices. We're not at the stage yet of doing that, but we are at the stage of technology certification. We have a certification program which has been launched and it's just starting to attract attention. We've already passed one player so that we can satisfy any hospital that wants to connect. Any data source, we can say to them, the product you're connecting to has been tested and does do the privacy protection that the vendor says it does. We've bashed the audit trail, we've tried to hack into it, and we've shown that it's robust. And that is quite important. When it comes to the principles, I don't want to steal the thunder of the GDPR topic you'll have tomorrow. So just to say, what are the kinds of areas that have to be covered by good practices? All of this lovely rainbow of topics, I'm not going to go through them, but you know them all very well. But we have to have good practices in all of those areas if we are going to have society to trust the way in which we use big data at scale. The quality seal is something I mentioned briefly just now, that we have developed a very rigorous method of testing clinical research platforms and also of examining the policies and procedures of the vendor who is developed and is supplying this platform to make sure that organizationally, on a people level and on a technical level, they are delivering something that can plug in and safely handle data whilst protecting the privacy of the data subjects involved. And this assurance is something that we didn't actually know would be vital. But as soon as EHR for CR was coming to a close, we heard from the hospitals, we're not going to get approval internally to connect to an external querying service unless there is some independent verification that it's trustworthy. So we were quite surprised that this was such a strong pressure. It became a precondition for many hospitals, so we had to get on with it and create this quality seal, which we're now marketing for companies to take. The other thing which blew me away over the last year, really, 15 months perhaps now, is that many of the hospitals wanted to come together and to help grow their capability to do research. So what was surprising to me was that they recognized right across Europe that many of them want to scale up their engagement in research. So rather than us thinking that actually we're going to have to pull teeth to get them to share their data, they actually were really excited at the prospect of being better research players. But they felt unable to be strong in that space. And so we've created a network of excellence of hospitals across Europe that are enthusiastic to accelerate their use of data for themselves as well as in research. And the big topic that they said matters most, and actually last year we had a great workshop, 100 people, and we had 2 breakout groups, one on information governance, privacy protection, and one on data quality. And I'd allocated the big room, the plenary room, to be the governance group, and the smaller room to be the data quality group, and we had to swap. Because actually, many people seem to trust us on the governance side. Oh, they've done that. They really wanted to get into data quality. And so we've created a data quality task force that has actually taken Europe's state-of-the-art methodological expertise in assessing data quality, statistical methods, to assess and profile data quality, turn that into tools. We're turning that now into a service that we can offer to hospitals. We can go and visit a hospital, perform tests, profile their data. Perhaps I'll just leave, I'm not going to go through these, but these are some of the most important dimensions of data quality. What we can now do is visit a hospital, profile their data quality, and what we're starting to do is to say, what can we learn from that? It's almost like genotype-phenotype, association. What are the endemic issues in the hospital that are giving rise to poor data quality? And what are the mitigations? What are the solutions to improve data quality? Is it educational? Is their EHR system rubbish? Are there other workflow issues or operational issues that are hampering them having great data that they can reuse? We've got some enthusiastic hospitals that want to prototype that learning with us, because we've said this has got to be co-created. We can develop the methodology to assess, but the understanding of what the issues are, we've got to co-create with the hospitals. We can't come in parachuting as experts. We've got to learn that with you. But we found some hospitals that say, yeah, we want to learn that with you too. So we're about to start some site visits over the summer to do that. And it's really exciting to see the enthusiasm and the energy. I wanted to close with a vision. Is that right? And am I right for time? Last slide.
Yes, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, good. So I'd like to just close with a vision. And I hope this means something to you. This is, if you like, almost my personal hopes and dreams on one slide. On the left, you have perhaps a very classical model, almost one might call it a biological model of health. We have our clinical understanding of disease, our molecular understanding of disease, and you heard just now a really outstanding talk from Peter about how you can bring these together to make really, if I could say, breathtaking insights, which was really gripping to hear. And there are many ways we can apply that new knowledge in things like evidence-based medicine, revising the evidence, predictive modeling, targeted therapies, and so on. And I think maybe I need to also put targeted diagnostics, having heard you on this slide. But I also want to draw attention to the right-hand side of this slide, where you've actually got more practical things, like the capabilities and capacities of health systems, which are finite, which are legacy, and which have to evolve as best they can. And then you've got the person, the human patient, not the biological patient, the human patient who has hopes and dreams and aspirations, who has a lifestyle they want to achieve and things they don't want to achieve. I've decided I'm not going to climb Everest in my life now. My wife would laugh at the thought that I might have ever had that hope given my physique. But anyway, you know, that's not my aspiration space. If I had asthma and you were treating me, that wouldn't be my target, get me to Everest level. But there will be people in this room who do very ambitious things, maybe not Everest. And if you had asthma, you might have a different standard of aspiration to me. There's a personalization at the human level which is different. And then we have to look at how we handle that. And in fact, Peter, you did touch a bit on this, about new models. So you were trying to shift the boundary between diagnostic investment versus interventional investment. And those are the kinds of changes that we need to see happening. But also much more patient empowerment. The human workforce to deliver healthcare tomorrow has to include the patient. We don't have enough paid staff as a very basic economic case. But actually people want to be involved. So we have the world of personalised medicine. It's sometimes known as, you know, predictive medicine and so on, precision medicine. But we also have the concept of personalised care. And I'd like you to see as a challenge for you as a community to actually take both seriously, not just one half of this diagram seriously. And to recognise also that if we are going to be learning, we need feedback loops. So that as we start to gain insights, we translate them back into changes and improvements in the way we do things. And this really, last line on the slide, is why you're here, isn't it? To help deliver that last line on the slide. Thank you very much.
So, any questions from the audience? Yes.
I'm curious as to the involvement of the various regulatory agencies in these discussions, because in groups that I've been involved with, companies, et cetera, they've ranged from bring it on to we don't want to talk about it, and are EMA and various country regulators involved in these groups?
Okay, so let me now make a plug for the annual conference. We're just in the middle of planning for November this year. We'll be in Gothenburg, and this afternoon I will hear what the dates are going to be, so that's how fresh this is. We would like to use that opportunity to showcase examples of real-world evidence accumulated through different methodologies. Because what you put to me as the question is exactly the issue. We have a hot and cold message from the regulatory environment. Clinical trials have sanitized patients under sanitized conditions. They do not reflect the real-world patients who will take the drug. We want more real-world evidence. And then real-world evidence is noisy, it's full of missing data points, it's captured in non-standardized ways. How can you trust it? Well, what we plan, I've got no one agreeing to this except my colleagues, is a regulatory panel. What we'd like to do, my dream for that November date, maybe early December, is that we will have a day where we're presenting lots of examples of real-world evidence. Not the informatics, actually, but what were the insights gained. And then invite the regulators to discuss success conditions for them to accept real-world evidence for top-flight decision-making. Not secondary ancillary decision-making, but for serious impact decision-making, what would be their success conditions? So the answer to your question is not coming from me, but it will be there by the end of the year, I hope. Jos?
Deepak, thank you for your very good talk. I have a question about clinical trials. I saw the recruitment figures that are not very positive.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always a question, how can you boost these figures? And I have related two questions to that. I saw that the references are about 10 years old.
Sure.
So how about the changes since then?
Mm-hmm.
Second, there is an issue of how to recruit patients. What you see often is that clinical trial designers, drug designers, are using kind of a standardized patient. So they narrow down the recruitment or the eligibility criteria. So it means that for some drugs you exclude everyone older than 61, you exclude females.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's an issue because it's not only a technical issue, but it is also a mindset that's deeply ingrained in those who design the trials. So how
Okay.
can you address that in your initiative?
Yeah. Well, yes. So firstly, I apologize, but you're quite right. The references for those slides are quite old. And that's actually because they were the slides we made at the beginning of the project, and they were, if you like, the opening mandate that we had to fix. But more recent work from organizations like Tufts, which is a kind of observatory, academic observatory on the landscape, suggests that the natural course of clinical trial recruitment scenarios hasn't improved much. But what we have seen is that where electronic health records are used to profile the patient population in advance of designing the study, you can radically increase recruitment. So we do know the solution is expected to work. So we have evidence that the problem exists still, and evidence that this kind of fix works. The evidence that it works is mainly in single organizations using a homegrown electronic health record system where they've been able to run effectively the EHR for CR solution in-house. What we've got is a federated, multi-vendor capable approach, but we're building it on the knowledge that it does work. Now, the second thing, you've actually touched on a talk I was giving at AstraZeneca in Sweden a few weeks ago, that there is the problem of the sanitized patient. And increasing recruitment through EHR for CR type solutions doesn't change the nature of who's looked for. And I think that the feeling coming out of the pharma industry at the moment is that the pragmatic clinical trial is the instrument that will help. Many clinical trials, and I had some slides which are not on this computer, examples of exactly what you say. You look at, so a colleague of mine in Manchester had done some work looking at a drug used for osteoporosis. And when you look at the osteoporosis exclusion factors, exclusion criteria, it's an age-related one, it's a comorbidity-related one. And when you look at all of the exclusions, you realize half the people taking the drug are excluded from the trial, which is nuts. But if you run a pragmatic clinical trial, you can actually be much more generous with your inclusion criteria. And that's where we see. The trouble with a pragmatic clinical trial is it's in a noisy ecosystem, and regulators don't take it seriously, which is part of why we're having this event later in the year. We want to push the regulators a little bit to be actually a bit more honest in saying you want realistic patients, but then you need to accept realistic data that goes with it. And we want to see how that debate takes place later this year. They haven't accepted to come yet, but I'm optimistic we can persuade them.
I have a final question, but that's also a question that could relate to the rest of the conference. I was very much intrigued by a number of slides that you presented, which I could immediately sense how, for example, results from this project could connect with your initiatives. And this brings me to a question that is actually a thorny question.
Yeah,
they
yeah.
feel like, and they fit in somewhere in those moments of yours. So how can we relate? Because we are also interested, at least from the perspective of this project, in looking at real world clinical
Yeah.
problems. We use 3 domains in order to assess those.
Mm-hmm.
We are very much interested to carry on and work with hospitals, for example, if there's a clinical problem that requires management of data, how we can help them with tools. So how can that fit in that scheme of yours? Or maybe that's a discussion that we should carry on for the next for these 2 days.
Well, I think it's really going to be a running thread. I don't think there'll be one answer. What I can't do is to tell you about any of the commercial products, like Insight. That's for them to answer. If you were to say, we've got a plug-in module that would go really well with you, that's got to be a B2B discussion. What I will say is that as an institute, we are wanting to be embracing of everybody and all opportunities. As an institute, we ourselves do not hold data, we don't conduct research, we don't build the tools, but what we do is promote the value of all of that and showcase them. And as an example, we have started just with a few projects on our website, just a place to store a summary of the project and to host its most scientifically valuable deliverables. Because a lot of the times projects' websites disappear after a few years, and that's a real shame. So that's the starting point. We haven't at the moment made any decision about having a tools inventory. We wouldn't be tool makers, but we could provide not a catalogue of data sources, but a catalogue of tools that are out there in the description. We haven't planned on that, but it's actually a really interesting idea. If we found a motivated group to help us, so this could be now a response back to you, to say, would somebody be interested in collating not just your own tools, but acting as an observatory of tools, and this may be something, I don't know whether you would plan to do it in Eden. We would be happy as an institute to host a searchable inventory of tools with links to all of the various places where they're being held. That's very much in line with what we could do.
Sounds very interesting for further discussion.
Yeah, I think so. Good. All right, I think I should stop. Oh no, one last.
It's a small one.
Yeah, okay.
Your research and scope is only around Europe, or it has also an international dimension? How do you
That's a good question. We created the Institute to be European just for practical reasons, because we've not got experience globally. The IMI program is also anchored in Europe. But the companies, Janssen included, are global companies. The standards, HL7, SNOMED, CDISC, are global standards. The GDPR is European, but similar privacy protection is going to be in place eventually across many developed parts of the world. So there's nothing that we're doing which is European, except the name. And our entity size is European. So we're very open to collaborating outside Europe. And we have good links, for example, with the Learning Health System movement in the US, with Chuck Friedman at the University of Michigan. And we have informal links with colleagues in Australia, Japan, China a little bit less. So we're very open to internationalization. I didn't plan that our institute would grow itself to be global. We thought we might partner other similar spirits, but if needed, we could also grow. Okay, I think it's Michelle's turn.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good.